Welcome to Science Actually, a podcast by Imperial College London students and staff. In our podcast, we explore the misconception around the human body. In each episode, a member of a podcast team interviews Imperial's experts to see if they have the answers to our burning questions.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Science Actually podcast, and today's episode is about food. My name is Ali and today I am joined by Jozef Youssef. Jozef is a professional chef and the founder of Kitchen Theory, a design studio which focuses on combining the senses with the dining experience. Hi Jozef, welcome to Science Actually and thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Pleasure.
I wanted to start by asking about your Kitchen Theory project. As I understand, it looks at moving away from thinking of taste as just an experience in the mouth and moving towards thinking of it as a neurological experience in the brain. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and the sort of things you found out in your project?
So Kitchen Theory, we're an experience design studio. We curate dining experiences, mostly or largely based on research. And from that understanding how we can, design more immersive and, entertaining, interesting, weird and wonderful dining experiences, but also looking at how these learnings can work towards allowing us to design more optimal food experiences in schools, care homes, hospitals, and the like. And essentially through having an understanding of that sensory and psychological relationship that people have with food, how we can kind of nudge them perhaps in the direction towards making more nutritious and more sustainable food choices.
So you mentioned just then about looking at it as a thing to bring to maybe care homes and looking at it to improve people's health. So how do you see it going beyond the sort of super gourmet experience and think of it as like a way that maybe students or the general public could see it to harness those ideas for their own food experiences? Could you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, essentially the idea is looking at how some of the cross-modal, because your senses don't work in isolation, so it's not all about what you taste or what you see or what you hear or what you smell or what you feel. It's about how these senses come together in your brain, how your senses feed back this very rich information back to your brain, and how the senses work in unison really to allow us to make kind of congruent thoughts about whatever it is, the experience that we are going through. And so some of the research that we do looks at kind of associations between things like color and taste or smell and taste. And for example, if I ask you just to think of 4 edible elements based on color, so you've got 1 red, 1 green, 1 white, and 1 black. And if I was to ask you to order those into what you perceive to be salty, bitter, sour, and sweet, there's no right or wrong answer, obviously, to something like that. The colors are just abstract. They're white, green, black, and red. And the flavors are obviously something that each one of us perceives, but we don't necessarily have to have a fixed kind of association. What's interesting is we've done research all over the world, and we've found from, when we've done this research, whether it's in the States or North or South America, whether it's in Asia or Europe, that 70-75% of the world's population will go with similar correlations. So the most obvious one being red being sweet. That's kind of seems to be one that most cultures will go with. But then even things like green being sour, maybe that's sour candies or lime or associations like that we have. There's even a hypothesis that it could be the kind of unripe fruit being kind of green and sour, red fruits being kind of red and sweet. Then you have things like white. Most people will go with salty for white, I guess, because salt is white, and that seems like maybe the kind of go-to. But then again, based on culture, when you're in places like Sweden, most people over there said that black was salty because of salty licorice. So there's obviously cultural associations that are in there. But generally, 70-75% of the world's population saw brown as being bitter. Maybe again, that's dark chocolate, coffee, tea, burnt charred foods that have a bit of bitterness to them. And so it's through understanding those kind of correlations that from there, then what we kind of understand is if there are those kind of taste color associations, or perhaps if you were engineering or designing a children's snack or yogurt kind of product or something like that, that maybe usually colors are added into these kind of things, maybe just by making something a little bit redder or a little bit pinker, that we can make it appear sweeter to the eye, making it taste or perceivably sweeter, whereas you haven't actually added any sweetness or any additional sweetness into it. It's those kind of understandings and research that then allow us to go away and understand how in a hospital, maybe at the moment we're not really getting it right. I mean, they're not really the right environment to, neither are school canteens in a lot of the instances that we've seen. They don't really have the right sensory properties to, engage children in things like mindful eating. And that's pretty important, is, rather than just kind of putting food in their face and really slowing them down a little bit, getting them to understand a little bit more about what they're eating, giving them some sensory enjoyment out of it. And we know that these kind of, environments like schools or care homes or hospitals aren't really designed to optimize the food experience. They're designed to be quite functional. And I guess our interest is in how can you, tweak the design of these kind of places to not only engineer the food and design the food to be more appealing, but how we can design the whole environment.
You touched on earlier about how food is with health. I found often students kind of see food as a way to benefit their own performance. For example, a lot of students use chocolate to relax, or a greasy breakfast to cure a hangover. I know personally a teacher used to tell me to have sliced tomatoes with salt over them, which would improve my own neuronal communication before an exam. We had 84% of our polling team suggest that they agreed that food can be used as a medicine. So what is your opinion on that? Do you think food can be used as a medicine or a drug?
Yeah, so food is definitely functional. I think there's lots of interesting stuff we could go into with that. I think there's a distinction here between a lot of people now are touting the idea of food as medicine, and food isn't medicine. They're very distinctly different things. I think it sounds very popular to make a statement like that, and it sounds very as if you're clued in about food and how to use it. But the miracles of modern medicine over the last century or so have changed the way we live and done things that food just would be able to. And medicine is curative in a sense that within days or weeks or whatever you can be cured, whereas food can't really measure up to that. There's no one soup or broth or potion that you can eat that's going to cure you of any serious kind of ailment, maybe a sore throat with, stuff like that, maybe. But, the point is that food must really be seen rather than putting that kind of pressure on it to live up to the expectations of medicine. I think we need to understand that food is actually the best preventative measure, and almost like thinking of it as health insurance, in a sense that a good diet is the best preventative measure from getting sick in the first place. So, although medicine is, curative, food is preventative. And I think we need to take more of that approach towards food. And I think once we start looking at that, then obviously the interest becomes in, well, it's not only for warding off disease, as you said, it can be towards optimizing our health and optimizing our brains and optimizing our, allowing us to operate at a higher level. And yes, of course, food is the fuel that essentially is converted into all these different neurotransmitters. Having a healthy gut, of course, is what allows us to, digest these foods properly, and to, the reason that you eat, let's say, foods rich in tryptophan, that tryptophan is then, converted into serotonin, and serotonin is known as the kind of the happy chemical. So can we make ourselves happier through eating more foods rich in tryptophan, like, I don't know, sweet potato or yogurt or turkey? Yes, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's not like Prozac, or it's not like, let's say in the case of libido, you're not going to find an aphrodisiac food that quite lives up to Viagra. However, a sustained diet and a balanced diet of a wide range of whole foods is undoubtedly going to improve your overall performance. So that, and the main thing here is making sure that you get about, anywhere between 25, 30 plus different whole foods in your diet each week. And that might sound like quite a bit. And I understand for students, that might be a bit daunting. But if you think about breakfast alone, and maybe if you were to have some granola or some oats, maybe with some flax seeds or sunflower seeds, and maybe a type of fruit or something in there already, that's probably hit about 3 or 4 of those in one meal. Then, if you have lunch, you have, I don't know, some salad that has about 3 or 4 so different ingredients. Look, the one best bit of advice I would give to any student when it comes to, if you're looking at health and your well-being in relation to food is, and I know this from having been obviously a student at university myself, and, and it wasn't what I did at the time. So maybe this is why I'm recommending that they should. Well, I did actually, because I guess I did to some degree, but is cooking from scratch at home. That's probably the most important element. It'll save you money in the long run, and it'll definitely improve your health. Undoubtedly. And the focus there being on not necessarily getting pasta and a ready-made pasta sauce. We're talking about getting pasta, getting some garlic, some canned tomato even, and just making a very simple kind of basic sauce yourself. But the point is, cooking from scratch is by far, and cooking, focusing on making sure that you get whole foods into your diet. That's the only really scientifically kind of guaranteed result thing that anyone can really confirm, is to say that if you eat a broad range of whole foods and a balanced amount throughout the kind of week, then that's going to ultimately be more powerful in some ways in terms of having a healthier, optimized body and diet than cutting calories to try and lose weight or whatever it may be when we normally think of how one manages a diet.
That's very interesting. What I wanted to touch on there was, as you're someone who is in the industry, is there a fear or a worry about the attitude that is progressed out of food as a medicine? Is there a sort of fear that comes with that, people and the industry is taking advantage of, that you worry about?
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the big differences is that you can take vitamin D as a supplement, and even, according to government guidelines, it's recommended to take vitamin D. But there's a big difference between taking vitamin D as a supplement and taking vitamin D from in more natural forms, in foods that it comes from. This is because in foods, every food or every ingredient has what you'd call a food matrix. And what that means is that you're not just getting vitamin B every time or D or C or whatever it is every time. Like, you're not just getting vitamin C every time you eat an orange. You're getting a load of other nutrients and macronutrients and chemicals and bioactive molecules that are interacting with that vitamin D. And we know that in those whole foods, that they're balanced in a way that allow for greater absorption into our bodies. And if we eat these same foods once they've been heavily processed, or once we're eating a supplement, we will not extract the kind of same amount out of it. So the problem is that, we're told to, or where it's marketed very much as kind of food as medicine. Food can make you healthier, which it can. But whether it's through the kind of products that we're being sold, and whether it's through the kind of dietary advice that's coming through commercial entities who are trying to sell products and who are supplementing and adding vitamins and ingredients and, nutrients into their foods, that can, I believe, is way more misleading than what we really kind of are led to believe. A very good example is when we talk about vegan people going on vegan diets, and especially plant-based diets. There's a huge misconception that, or I've met many people who will equate being on a vegan diet with being on a healthier diet, and being on a plant-based diet, as they say, it's a healthier way of eating, being on a vegan diet or being on a plant-based diet. And that's not necessarily true. And where it's not necessarily true is in that a lot of plant-based foods that are available now in supermarkets, like with regular foods, are very, very heavily processed. So if you look at a lot of vegan burgers or plant-based burgers that are on the market at the moment, yes, they may taste good and look a bit like meat and taste a bit like meat and tick all the whatever boxes it is that people are looking for. However, they are full of lots and lots of different bulking agents and additives and texturizers and a whole host of other E-numbers and chemicals that aren't necessarily, I don't want to demonize E-numbers and chemicals, because there's nothing necessarily wrong. It's all about how much of this stuff that you're eating. So there's nothing wrong with processed foods. I myself like a McDonald's and fast food every now and again. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with all this food, but it's all about the balance in which you are consuming it. And so the worst thing you can do with food and your relationship with food is to kind of have a subtractive and compromising approach. So by that I mean, compromising in terms of eating less or cutting out certain foods from your diet. If anything, the better advice is always to add more foods into your diet. So it's not about cutting out unhealthy foods, it's about adding healthier foods into your diet. And again, the whole food and medicine thing, a lot of highly processed foods like plant-based foods tend to have a lot of nutrients and minerals stripped out of them. And so if you want to eat a plant-based diet and you want it to be healthier, then you want to be doing a lot more cooking from scratch, or you want to make sure that you're eating a lot more ingredients that are whole foods rather than eating a plant-based diet that's based on processed foods.
So almost as if having a large range of foods is more important than simply going, I'm going to go be plant-based, I'm going to go and just do one thing. I think personally, it almost arrived too late in my life that cooking food from scratch would be so beneficial, and not only that, actually cheaper. However, maybe you can agree with me, I feel like the biggest hurdle at the sort of 18, 19 age for a student is the stigma and sort of the sort of burden of having to cook for yourself. Is there a way you would recommend to get over that sort of stigma and sort of to start cooking?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's something that, it's not just for people who are 18, 19 or, of university age. That's something that you find at different points in life. So you'll now more than ever in this time in history where we are in cities like London, you have a large number of single people of all ages, let's say, especially those who are, let's say, kind of out working and living alone that suffer a similar problem. And then you have quite a big problem when it comes to the elderly, and especially elderly men. In particular, there seems to be quite a big issue around that. I guess we're talking about a generation that maybe never had to set foot in the kitchen when they were young. When we're talking about people who are 70, 80 onwards, that's not say that they didn't, but let's say that that's maybe a generalization, that there seems to be a bit of an issue there, that there isn't the motivation to cook for oneself. Maybe there isn't the knowledge, there isn't the confidence, there isn't the willingness, the desire. Look, I mean, it can be very difficult to muster up the motivation to cook for one. So a few things that help. Number one, food is such a communal thing. So I think especially if you're at that age where you are a student, if you're in dorms or if you have flatmates, is trying to pool the experience. So that number one allows you to pool the funds. Number two, it allows you to distribute the burden a little bit. So maybe if four of us are living together, each night of the week, one of us cooks or something like that, and we pool the money in together for the shopping. That's one kind of idea that you can take. So essentially finding other people to enjoy the activity with, rather than it just becoming such a solo type of activity. Second of all is making sure that what you do is just really simple. Don't start with like really difficult things. There are plenty of really, really, really tasty recipes out there that start with using maybe 2 or 3 ingredients. The most basic one I can give you off the top of my head is just get about, 3-4 cloves of garlic, chop them down really, really finely, sweat them off in a little bit of olive oil in a pan, and add a can of peeled plum tomatoes or something like that, or just peeled tomatoes. Pour them in, crush them up in there, and let it cook out on a very low heat for somewhere like an hour and a half or something like that. You will end up with the best tomato sauce that you'll ever have. A bit of salt and pepper, of course, in there to season it. Then the final thing I would say is cook in bulk, maybe. For some people that helps, which is taking 1 day of the week or 2 days where they say, I'm going to cook my meals for the rest of the week. You don't have to cook 3 meals for 7 days a week. I mean, that's an awful big burden. But, maybe it's about learning how to make a good lasagna and making a tray of that, or learning how to make a shepherd's pie, or learning how to make a dish that's nostalgic from home, or that, that you really enjoy. And I think that's the other thing as well, is making sure that you're cooking foods that you want to eat, that you'll enjoy. That's super important, is that you set out to not just for simplicity, but also for enjoyment, and start to do it. And over time, you will start to see that there is an awful lot of pleasure that comes with the act of cooking. Some people get to a point of where they consider it really meditative. Like I make fresh pasta And I consider the whole process to be so enjoyable. But I can see how it would be. I remember in my days of learning how to do it, it was stressful. But again, it's just practice and, maybe get a few dishes under your belt. And, there's also a lot of dishes you can make that don't really require recipes. So whether that's, cooking up some pearl barley or some spelt or some bulgur wheat or these kind of cheap grains and kind of very nutritionally dense grains, a little bit of maybe marinated vegetables or protein like meat or fish or whatever it is, and a little bit of salad on the side. These are all things that you can quite easily achieve. And you don't actually need recipes or guides to make it happen.
That is some amazing advice. I'm so glad you shared it with us. I think I'd like to end with one last question, and it's a bit of a fun question, so it's just whatever you feel like on the day. And that is, what is one meal that, not your favorite, but it's just the sort of meal where you think, if people knew about this, everyone would cook it. Just a meal that's healthy and also a little bit fun, that no one really thinks about. What comes to mind?
Oh, I don't know if I have a meal that meets all those criteria. The meal I definitely enjoy making, and I enjoy making it, well, what I'll tell you about is a meal that I enjoy making when people come over and visit me. So what I enjoy doing is making sushi with them. Now, it's not that people don't know about sushi, but it's that most people haven't made sushi. And there's a few things with that. Number one, it gets everyone who comes over, rather than them just watching me cook for them, it allows them to engage and interact with the process. And so it makes it hands-on. It means that as a dinner party or when you have friends over, it's a very nice way of sharing the experience kind of with them. Of course, I'll do all the preparation in advance. All the rice will be cooked, all the fish is cut, all the stuff is kind of done, but it's more about just getting them in. And so number one is about the social aspect of everyone pitching in and kind of doing something and it being a bit more of a hands-on experience, and people absolutely love doing that. So if you ever are having friends over and stuff like that, asking for their help in the kitchen, if you know what you're doing and it's not frenetic and you're not just barking orders at them, is always fun. The other reason I do it is that it is healthy and it is light, and it's kind of one of those things that's very shareable. And again, that kind of comes back to the social aspect of, food is so much about socializing that, if you're cooking for people or if you're eating with people, that you want to kind of share as much as you can. And number three, it teaches people something new as I'm doing it. So, for most people, they haven't actually rolled their own sushi. And interestingly enough, most people, after they've actually done it with me once, will sit there and say, I didn't realize it was that easy. Now, to any people who are taking offense to that, I'm not saying making sushi is easy. What I'm saying is making an edible form of home sushi is very achievable. And it basically boils down to a very small number of ingredients that you need that are very accessible and that anyone can kind of make. But of course, there's a lot of finesse and refinement that goes into making true world-class sushi. But yeah, that would be my pick if I was to invite people around for a meal.
That is fantastic. I think that's an amazing way to end. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us and your advice, and we really appreciate that. And thank you very much for coming on the podcast. And thank you all for listening. That is the Science Actually podcast.